fellows, and welcome to Pen Night Radio, where we slay our personal demons and arm ourselves to write our best content. I am your host, PK, unofficially knighted by a fictional character, which means you do not have to call me sir. Did you know that I'm a teacher? Well, I've been in the business for 7.5 years now, first as a sub, then as a personal aide, and now I'm finishing my second year as an English teacher. And I got to tell you, it's a lot. Teaching is the kind of job that demands all of your time, whether you like it or not. You end up becoming a great multitasker. You end up sleeping pretty heavily at night because by day, you just do not stop until you drop. And that can be pretty daunting for writers. Am I right? After all, if we're going to write, we need that time. But where do we find that time? That's why I started Pen Night Radio. People were telling me they just didn't have the time to flesh out and develop their art. Now, what if I told you you could actually teach with your writing? Let's dive into why we're here. Let's take our pens and slay the demons that are holding us back today, and then we write. Pen Night Radio is brought to you by One True Promotion, an alliance of authors that are dedicated to promoting the indie community. And I'm very excited today because we are going to have a very, very special guest on today's episode, somebody who has never been on the podcast before, but who we have met at a tabling event in Monroe, in the Williamstown area. And I'm very excited for you to hear what that person has to say, especially about how your writing can teach, because we are both teachers, both Stockton alumni, have both worked in the exact same school districts, have been around the same kids, been around the same educational programs. And let me tell you, I thought I knew this person, but it turns out there is a lot that I didn't know and a lot that you need to know if you are going to transform your writing. Okay, let's get back to the first segment. So, the best way that I learn from a book, any book, I'm having a little bit of trouble, believe it or not, coming up with examples. Like I said, I am a teacher. And the thing is that teachers work until Friday. It is Friday right now while I am recording this segment. And I am, got to tell you, this is the first opportunity I've gotten all week to do this. In addition to teaching on an alternate route track, which means I go to class for part of the week. I'm also applying to work at the YMCA. So it's been a lot and doesn't leave me quite the recording time I would like. So pardon me if this seems a little bit improvised, but the truth is I learned a lot from books. Now, take Harry Potter, for instance, right? I learned a lot from Harry Potter in terms of theme. During Harry's last conversation with Dumbledore, which I flash back to routinely, I just learned a lot about life and living and what it means to, move on after you lose a loved one, and what it means, what magic really means in the human experience here in the real world, how that word that means spells in Harry Potter can translate into, some of the things we care about here in real life. Of course, this is happening inside your head, Harry, but why should that mean that it isn't real? So, you can learn a lot from a book in terms of just its story, its conflict, its theme. But the books that I love the most are the ones that I can learn. So they could be any topic at all, but I can learn something just by reading it, just by absorbing the text structure and the writing itself. See, I might know what I want to say, but I don't know how to say it. And with some books you read, if there's a lot of jargon, if there's a lot of digression, if there's a lot of perhaps an overuse of figurative language, maybe an overuse of symbol, maybe an overuse of foreshadowing, again, jargon. It can be hard to really examine the text. But when a text is structured, when a text is beautifully structured, to the point that you can just understand how to do something the first time you read it. That is my favorite kind of book. And that is the kind of book you want to write. You want to be able to teach with your writing. You want to be able to write so well that somebody who opens up your book can learn from you, because you know what? If you're able to do that, you will have a lifetime fan. you will have someone who keeps coming back to your work because it has that special ingredient that helps them with wherever they are in life right now, especially if they happen to be a fellow artist. They'll read a lot of books that they enjoy. They'll seek out a lot of stories that they want to continue with, and they might read those books once, maybe twice. But if you can teach with your writing style, they will come back to you. They will come back to you personally. They will read multiple genres that you write, fiction, nonfiction, you name it, because your name is attached to it. That's what happens when you know how to teach with your writing. Now, what are some tips that I have for learning how to teach when you write? Well, for starters, understand, what writing style is, understand what story structure is, understand just exactly what you're going for in writing. Now, we learn about story structure in school, in grade school. We learn about symbol and all that stuff in K to 12. And many of us probably don't go to college for writing. I did, many other people have, but not everybody does. For the simple reason that, you might seek other opportunities than college, or you might decide that going to college, you need to spend all that money on something worthwhile, meaning something that actually has a career in it. Writing can be a little sketchy there. It's a great skill. Everybody will tell you it's a great skill, a multifaceted skill, but does it get you a job when you graduate? Well, that's a little less promising. So the point is, you may not have studied writing for very long, and you may need a refresher since you've been out of school. There is no shame in that. This is what story structure is. A structure's 7 main parts include exposition, which is the beginning, rising action, which is where the plot picks up, the climax, which is the turning point, the falling action, where we head towards the resolution, which is the fifth part, and then the denouement and the themes. So in school, you were probably told that, Mount Plot had only 5 stops on it: the beginning, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. The denouement is the conclusion after the climax of a narrative in which the complexities of the plot are unraveled and the conflict is finally resolved. So you see, you come towards a conclusion, you come towards a concluding chapter where all your parties gather in one place and kind of assess what has just occurred. But that then leaves room. You can't end the book there. You can't end the book where they just get together and say, wow, that was really something. That's when you get into the denouement, where they begin to unravel and the conflict finally begins to resolve. In the denouement of a traditionally structured plot, the villain may be exposed, the mystery explained, misunderstandings clarified, or lovers reunited. Now that's sounds pretty good, doesn't it? And of course, what is theme? Theme is the subject of a talk, a piece of writing, your thoughts, an exhibition, a topic. I personally teach topics as main ideas, central, topics that a book discusses. For example, Spider-Man. This is a movie, but it's based in books. Spider-Man discusses a guy who is bit by a radioactive spider and becomes a superhero, and is hated by some for being a vigilante, but loved by most for being an inspiration, and has to fight a lot of villains and struggles in his love life. These are all topics in Spider-Man. When it comes to theme, I teach that as lesson. I like to think of the theme as the lesson. And what is the lesson in Spider-Man? If you are a 90s baby and this was one of the first superhero movies you saw, say it with me: with great power comes great responsibility. Take away the webs, the costumes, the mask, the villains. Take it all away. What can we take away? What can we process? If we have great power, we have a responsibility to use it well. That is how I teach theme in my classroom. So, how can you do this? Now that we got a little refresher on what are basically the 7 basic parts to a story, how can you use your writing to just teach this without having to say it in a podcast? Well, I have a couple main points here for you to consider. Point 1 is that you should study any book you read. You should study a book structure to hone your own. Everybody has a style of speaking. Everybody has certain word choices they use. Everybody favors certain phrases or clauses in their works. Everybody has, a certain author that they might emulate, at least in their early career. George R. R. Martin is a very famous writer. You should know who he is. He is the writer of the Song of Ice and Fire books, which were the subject, the topic, the central idea behind a certain television show that broke a lot of records and then broke a lot of hearts when it ended horrifically, terribly. We talked about that a couple weeks last week. George R. R. Martin has a distinctive way that he writes the Game of Thrones novels, but he also does a lot of borrowing from J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings. A couple of the biggest scenes in Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, were inspired by the fact that Gandalf, spoiler alert, goes down toward the end of the first volume, Fellowship of the Ring. He remembered reading that as a child and being so devastated to have lost that character, that source of wisdom, that ally to the main character. And so he became very fascinated with the idea of taking characters away from other characters and seeing how the surviving characters grow as a result of that. He didn't write it the same way Tolkien did. Tolkien did capture a sense of loss and devastation, but his writing is very positive. It's very, spiritual in my opinion. It's very focused on hope and fighting for what's good and right and just, even though you're taking all these hits against the forces of evil. George R. R. Martin adapts the style when he kills characters in his books. He tends to write with a sense of irony. Is it sad? It's pretty sad. But the word choices he uses, when Tyrion Lannister kills his own father, who dies on the toilet, the medieval toilet called the privy, shot in the gut by his own son, George R. R. Martin doesn't really shed too many tears over that. He just makes a very ironic statement. Lord Tywin Lannister did not, in fact, shit gold. A Storm of Swords, George R. R. Martin. This ironic statement is a comment on the fact that Tywin Lannister, who was thought of as untouchable because of his wealth and his ability to win wars, it turns out that he is, in fact, mortal. So we don't really focus on the emotion of a son killing his own father in this scene. We actually focus more on the irony of it. If you peruse these Game of Thrones novels, that is exactly what you will find. George R. R. Martin writes with a very ironic tone. So if your goal is dramatic irony and wit and wisdom, then just by reading a paragraph out of Ice and Fire, you can learn how to do that. And just by reading a paragraph out of your work, an author who is trying to learn from you will learn exactly what they need to do. There's another book that I was reading recently, and we talk about it a little bit in the interview later, but it's by Mike Nelson, and it's called 7 Keys for Student Success. Yes, you can. I actually said that backwards. It's yes, you can. 7 Keys to Student Success. In our school, we teach persuasive writing, informative writing, nonfiction, arguing your point, or analyzing literature, and just teaching anybody who's reading what the main points of a narrative are. And in this endeavor, we try to teach the kids to gather evidence and then perform some analysis for, the highest possible grade. That involves taking quotations and putting them in the book. And then that involves literally explaining what those quotations mean and how you can connect them to the claim that you made at the beginning of your chapter. What I love about Mike Nelson's book is that I get so fascinated with his structure that I literally lose the story. He's talking to these kids about how they can be successful. He talks to them about their decision making in chapter 1, and that's good. That's something I want them all to hear. But when I'm reading it, I get so swept up in his style. He opens up with a personal story, which is about LeBron James choosing to leave the Cleveland Cavaliers to go play for the Miami Heat. He tells the story in great detail before he connects it to the idea of a student making a tough decision that their friends might not agree with on their academic journeys. And he connects it so well. He uses the personal story as a hook to introduce his topic with such efficiency. By going over those paragraphs, I can give the kids clear examples of how they can do this in their own essay. He then proceeds to gather quotations from several other sports players and motivational speakers from throughout history and explain exactly what they meant by those short quotations. He doesn't write a lot. He's very concise. But by going over those pages, you can learn exactly what is a topic sentence, a personal story, a hook, a claim, a piece of evidence, and a piece of analysis in just 3 pages. Study that book structure. Study the structure of the book you are reading and take detailed notes, and you will know exactly how to replicate that in your own rough drafts. And then you'll be able to go beyond that and start exploring your own style. Here's another main point I want to make. Teach theme and main idea by examining your notes before you go in. Remember those notes we were just talking about? Remember those notes? Study them. Before you pen the next chapters, study those notes. I do this all the time with the Calipar novels, and it helps me tremendously. I don't take a whole lot of story structure notes anymore now that we're 9 years into the process. And I've discussed on the podcast before, I really need to focus on drafting instead of note taking. But I do still take notes. I take notes that study what the theme or main idea of a scene appears to be. That way, I can emphasize it. I can, when I'm choosing my key words that I use in a chapter, I can make sure that we are focusing on a main idea and teaching a theme so well that when you read it, you'll know exactly what the book's trying to get across. Subtle, but obvious. And that is something that you can easily do in your writing. Knights, I'm telling you, even if you are new to this, even if you've never done this before, let me try out this writing thing. Let me just try it out. Study the notes you take and write down, what is my theme? What is my main idea? Underline phrases that seem to be getting that across, and then use that in your next chapter. The feedback you will get is that your book connected with somebody. They understood it. Moreover, they learned for their own work how to develop a strong theme because they just looked at a couple of pages of your work. That's my second main point. My third main point, develop characters by understanding conflict. I'm going to say it again. Develop your characters by understanding conflict. Character development was a mystery to me for a little while. Some characters would naturally develop, and I really didn't know why, but some would stay very static through my drafts. They would just kind of be a reaction piece. Somebody who, Melanie Greer in Barker's Rules in the early chapters was just reacting to everything that he chose to do. And what was her reaction? Horror, desperation, panic. That was pretty much consistent throughout the whole first half of the book. And the character didn't develop much. Not until I had some experts look at it. Thank you, team. But years later, I'm really starting to understand what develops characters. And that is when I understand the conflict. A conflict is not, I'm on a quest for vengeance. Good Lord, I made that mistake for so many years. A conflict is not, I am on some quest for love, for honor, for vengeance. No, 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 no. A conflict is this. In my quest for vengeance, I've killed someone. I've broken the law, violated my religious views, forever changed the trajectory of my life because now I'm a fugitive. And I have to get real comfortable lying, cheating, and stealing to avoid going to jail. When you understand what conflict is beneath the surface, then as the scene changes, as the scenario shifts, and the character has to do things they would never normally do, the character develops. The character begins to develop, and as you have them reflect on what is changing and act even more differently than before, you will be working with a dynamic character. See, I kept coming at character so confused because I was going straight to character and trying to understand who this person was and what was their one strength and their one flaw, or sorry, their 10 strengths and their one flaw, and how that flaw was supposed to mess them up. And I was writing these long dialogue sequences that were just kind of losing the story in places. And I just didn't understand for the longest time what I was doing wrong. But now I do. First, I have to understand what their conflict is. What is happening to them that they have to respond to? And if it's an effective conflict, they won't respond to it the same way they've responded to things in the first chapter. That was what I learned from Josiah Bancroft in Senlin Ascends. The character of Senlin, who goes to the Tower of Babel with his wife, is not really interested in exploring. He has a list, a tried and tested pamphlet of things they are supposed to do at the Tower of Babel. And when they exhaust that list, he intends to take his wife home. She's the one who wants to explore. And when she gets lost, when he loses her in this immense crowd where people are said to disappear forever, he starts running to every corner of the market, telling people that he's lost his wife and he needs to know where all the places are so he can go to them and find her. That's the end of chapter 2. And I realized, good Lord, he's already developing. All of a sudden, this guy is an explorer. He wasn't interested in exploring before. And that was when I really started to understand character. The way he structured his conflict and allowed that to develop his character taught me the lesson that I was missing all of those years. Knights, you can do that in your work. And the structure of your text will contain the lessons that your readers need to hear. All right. Well, I threw a lot at you, so we're going to go away for a minute. And when we come back, I'm going to introduce the next segment, which is our interview for Drop a Line. Stay tuned.